Chaim Weiss was born on September 29, 1971, to parents Anton and Pessi Weiss. He was the eldest of 3 siblings, and the family, who were Orthodox Jews, lived in Willowbrook in Staten Island, New York. According to those who knew Chaim, he was a well-liked, outgoing, smart and active teenager who had a great sense of humour. He loved to play basketball and chess, and was a Talmud scholar. By 1986, Chaim was 15 years old and was in his 3rd year at the all-boys Yeshiva of Long Beach in New York, known amongst the locals as Mezivta. For those unfamiliar with Judaism, a yeshiva is a traditional Jewish educational establishment where the main focus is studying rabbinic literature, mainly the Talmud and the Halacha, with Torah and Jewish philosophy being studied in parallel. By 1986, Chaim had been there for around about 2.5 years. Many boys Chaim's age would have attended yeshiva in other states, but he decided to remain closer to home and took up residence in Long Beach, living in a dorm at the establishment located on 63 East Beach Street. Most of the 40 boys shared dorm rooms with 2 or 3 students per room, other than 2 students who had their own single rooms on the 3rd floor, one of which accommodated Chaim. He was the top of his class and was also one of several boys from his school who would help carry in groceries for an elderly woman who lived across the street from the dormitory block. He was a kind and compassionate young man who had a bright future ahead of him. On Halloween night of 1986, Chaim had spent much of that Friday in lessons as usual before attending the Shabbat services that evening before reading or studying in the hallway outside of his dorm until between 12:45 and 1 a.m, according to 2 study partners who had witnessed him there. This may seem odd to some, but this was during the Sabbath, which begins at sunset on Friday and lasts until sunset on Saturday. It prohibited Chaim from turning lights on and off in his bedroom, therefore he used the hall lights to be able to read his material. This in itself was not an uncommon practice. Chaim reading in the hall was the last reported sighting of the 15-year-old alive. It was known at the time that Chaim had not particularly been feeling well that night and decided that he was going to turn in for some sleep. Interestingly to note, later that same night, a classmate claimed that his dorm room had been slightly opened by someone, then closed again. His room was just down the hall from Chaim's. The student assumed that it was one of his roommates returning and fell back asleep without a second thought. The following morning, November 1st, it struck many as strange that between 7:30 and 8 a.m, Chaim failed to appear at Sabbath morning prayers. Believing the 15-year-old may have accidentally slept in, a dorm counsellor knocked on his dorm room door, but he received no response. The counsellor then entered the room and was met with a grisly scene. Chaim's upper body was lying on the floor, with his legs and feet still on the bed, the room splattered with blood. He had been brutally murdered, with his skull having been smashed by a hatchet-like weapon at least twice, likely between the wee hours of 1:20 and 6 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, November 1st of 1986. It seemed that Chaim, who was dressed in his pajamas, had been moved from the bed onto the floor. Then the perpetrator shifted his body again 2 feet away, seemingly hours after he had been attacked. Some peculiarities were noted at the scene, including this movement of Chaim's body. It is customary in the Orthodox religion for the deceased's body to be taken off the bed and placed at the lowest and coolest point. Also of interest, the bedroom window was left open. This was notably very strange, considering Chaim was unwell, having taken antibiotics for a sore throat, and this was also during a very cold winter spell. Many believe there is some significance to the window being left open, mainly that it is customary in the Orthodox religion to open a window to allow a deceased spirit to depart. Since Chaim's room was on the 3rd floor and there was no fire escape at that side of the building, it was impossible for someone to have entered and left his dorm through the window. There was a combination lock on the main front door of the institution, but not on the dormitory doors. Also of note, there were no signs of forced entry, though some speculated the assailant may have entered via the fire escape and an open window at the rear of the building. It is also possible that the killer may have actually known the combination for the main door, though many deem it more likely that the murderer was already within the boundaries of the dormitory block. It should also be noted that no candle was lit, contrary to some reports. This is also customary in regards to the Shabbat. Candles are not to be lit after sunset on Fridays. A candle was found lit at the scene following the murder, placed by one of the school's rabbis, which was to burn for 7 days in Chaim's memory. Rather interestingly though, a second candle was found lit in the room 2 days later, when the crime scene had already been sealed and secured, but nobody knew who was responsible for placing it there. Nobody at the school ever admitted to it. Police were swiftly contacted and arrived at the school, though they couldn't question those at the yeshiva until the Sabbath had ended. This left authorities somewhat frustrated, but it was prohibited in Jewish Orthodox culture to do so. All of the students and staff were eventually interviewed extensively over the following weeks, and many took polygraph tests in regards to Chaim's murder, and nobody was suspected as being the culprit at that time. What also frustrated police, however, was the fact that in Jewish culture they cannot write, and it is against their customs to gossip and report to the police regarding their suspicions about someone or something without some sort of proof, though this normally doesn't apply to homicides. The investigators appealed for them to come forward, no matter what, but the boys at the school remained silent. Whether it was because they were suffering from shock due to the situation, their obligations to their Orthodox religion, or whether they were hiding something, remains up for much debate. An ex-student did come forward in later years and claimed that one previous student had allegedly taken his own life in the dormitory bathrooms at yeshiva 2 years prior to Chaim's murder, though the circumstances surrounding their death are unclear. The students at the yeshiva were offered counselling following the horrific crime, and the yeshiva itself offered a $25,000 reward to catch Chaim's killer. Meanwhile, despite Orthodox Jews not normally allowing such procedures to occur, an autopsy was carried out on Chaim Weiss, as it is legally required to do so in such cases in the state of New York. The medical examiner's findings showed that Chaim's face had been bludgeoned with a hatchet-like weapon, which subsequently severed his spinal column, though the weapon in question was never found. A knife was allegedly found on school property, but no further leads came from this, and whether it was connected to the murder remains to be seen. Some reports claim that Chaim was also stabbed repeatedly in the head. There was also no sign of a struggle, robbery, or any evidence of sexual assault. Due to the fact there was no evidence of a struggle, it is likely that Chaim was asleep when he was violently attacked and killed. Interestingly of note, a single strand of hair was found at the crime scene, which many believe belonged to the assailant. But since it was a mere single strand, investigators are allegedly hesitant to test it in case they accidentally destroy their only credible evidence. They are waiting for a suspect to be named and investigated before they even consider taking the steps to test the DNA found near Chaim's body. It is deemed unlikely that anti-Semitism played a part in this case. As previously mentioned, it was Halloween, the night that Chaim was murdered, something which Jews do not celebrate. Due to the general public celebrating the season, security at the school were on the lookout for any anti-Semitic acts of violence against the students during Halloween celebrations. As Jews, the school commonly suffered anti-Semitic abuse from the outside, though it was deemed rather mild, such as egg throwing and verbal abuse. To be safe, many of the boys would travel in pairs whilst walking from the dorms to the main school building. The administration at Yeshiva agreed with police that the abuse was rather minor and couldn't see any reason as to why such behaviour would have led to a brutal murder, but the Jewish community out with the Yeshiva believed the attack could have been anti-Semitic and ushered in even more security to protect the boys, despite their concerns that one of the patrolling officers allegedly had a number of rifles in his car. Chaim's father, Anton, eventually sued the yeshiva for $15 million for inadequate security during the time his son was in residence. Security should have ensured his son's safety, but it didn't. The yeshiva administration had failed in this aspect, and they settled the lawsuit out of court. Many then started to speculate a potential cover-up in regards to the murder at the yeshiva in order to protect the students and the administration. It is believed that whoever murdered Chaim at least knew the layout of the dorms and probably knew that he and only one other student had single bedrooms at the far end of the hallway. It's certainly suspicious that one student was awoken to someone entering and exiting their room during the night. Did they perhaps think that they were Chaim, but upon realising it wasn't, left? What is also odd is that over 40 boys slept in the dormitories, and yet on the night the murder occurred, nobody heard or saw anything out of the ordinary. It should be noted that a jogger came forward and told authorities that he saw a young male individual who resembled a yeshiva student a few blocks away from the school by the pier at approximately 7 a.m. on the morning Chaim's body was found, but unfortunately they have never been identified. Whether they were involved in Chaim's death also remains a mystery. The police looked into the possibility that a mentally ill man who had been attacking senior citizens in the Long Beach area at the time was a potential suspect, but they concluded that the cases were not related. One of the more popular theories involved a man who was a janitor at the school who had allegedly had confrontations with Chaim in the weeks prior to his death. The man, who was not Jewish, was found in Poland and questioned, but he died without admitting any wrongdoing. Police never found any evidence to link him to Chaim's murder, therefore he was cleared. but rumours in the yeshiva administration and many previous students allegedly believe that the janitor was indeed responsible for this despicable crime. Many have been left baffled as to why a well-liked 15-year-old boy was so brutally killed in his dorm room, a place which should have been safe. According to his father, Anton Weiss, his son never complained of having any problems at school, nor did he express any personal problems he was possibly having. The motive for this crime has never been established, though according to the New York Daily News, the dorm itself had actually been burgled in recent years. Whether this is connected to the crime or not is unknown. A few years after Chaim was killed, something very strange happened. The Weiss family received an anonymous Easter-themed postcard, which read, quote, "Know what happens to chickens when they get too old to lay Easter eggs? They die. Happy Easter." This was chilling, and to this day authorities have no idea who sent this postcard to the Weisses. Sadly, Chaim's grave was also allegedly vandalised after this, again by a person or persons unknown. It's baffling to the Weiss family as to why their son was murdered, as he had no known enemies, neither did they, and he was a kind and friendly young man. Despite voicing his concerns regarding the lack of progress made in the case by police, Anton Weiss still keeps in regular contact with the Nassau County Police, hoping new leads will eventually surface in regards to his son's murder. The case was reopened in 2013 as the police in Nassau were looking into their cold cases, during which they voiced their beliefs that either a fellow student or a member of yeshiva staff were likely responsible for the death of Chaim Weiss. Police hope that previous students will eventually muster up the courage to voice their suspicions and or observations on the night of the murder, something which was echoed by Chaim's father Anton. He's hoping that now many of the boys will be parents themselves, they will understand his pain and need for answers. Some new details about the case were revealed in 2017, following a local news outlet, Pix 11, doing a segment on Chaim's case. During this, it was revealed by Anton that the summer before his son was murdered, he called home from camp, deeply upset and desperate to come home. Anton asked his son what he was upset about, but he wouldn't tell him. Chaim then went to visit his grandparents in Europe following the camp, and during which time his parents received a number of calls from Rabbi Avram Cooper, who was Chaim's teacher when he was murdered. The rabbi asked when Weiss would be back, calling Anton multiple times to ask this same question. His response was in a few weeks. The rabbi subsequently met Chaim upon his return in his home in Brooklyn, their meeting lasting only for around 10 minutes or so, before Chaim returned to his parents' vehicle, visibly upset. Once again, Chaim did not elaborate on what had upset him. Anton firmly believes that Rabbi Cooper knows more about his son's murder than he is willing to admit. Accusations of abuse were revealed by a former yeshiva student who had attended the school in the mid-70s, and he ridiculed Rabbi Cooper for not doing more to protect the students. Cooper himself, however, told Anton Weiss to perhaps look closer to home in regards to something they had perhaps done which resulted in the murder of Chaim. These remarks left the Weiss family incredibly angry and understandably upset. The biggest question in this case is motive. What motive could one possibly have to murder a 15-year-old boy whilst he slept soundly in his dorm? Did a stranger enter the building and attack him in a random Halloween prank gone wrong? Or was he targeted because he was an Orthodox Jew? Was his murder somehow connected to someone at the yeshiva, a fellow student, or someone of authority? Did he perhaps witness or fall victim to the alleged abuse that took place at the school? Was he perhaps threatening to tell someone, and as a result, it cost him his life and forced him into eternal silence? Despite all of the evidence gathered in this case, what truly happened on the night Chaim Weiss was murdered remains shrouded in mystery. Over 1,000 people attended Chaim's funeral at Shomrei Hadass Chapel in Borough Park, Brooklyn. He was then buried in Floral Park Cemetery in South Brunswick, New Jersey. Anton said of his late son, quote, "I was proud to have him as a son. I felt like he was a gift to us." Over 35 years have passed since the murder, and Chaim's family are still searching for answers, hoping that one day justice will prevail. Anyone with information regarding the murder of Chaim Weiss are encouraged to contact Nassau County Police on 1-800-244-TIPS. There is currently a reward up to $25,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons involved in the murder of 15-year-old Chaim Weiss.